Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are finally back with another program on the Shoulders of Giants with Rabbi Shmuel Bloom. On this program, we're going to be talking about such an important topic, the topic of Da'as Torah. Life throws so many questions at us, big and small, and we need to know what to do. So, right, we could look at it from our perspective, what looks like the right or wrong thing to do, but what does the Torah say about it? If you want to live a true Torah life, you need to know, what does the Torah say in each situation? So, we are going to be with Rabbi Shmuel Bloom, who for the past 70 years has been involved in leadership positions, starting as a closed talmid of both Rav Yaakov Yitzchak Ruderman and Rav David Kronglass in the yeshiva of Neuberger Yisroel, working as the executive director in the yeshiva in St. Louis, and then joining Gedolei Yisroel in America, which he was for over 35 years, working on a daily basis with Rav Moshe Sher and Gedolei Yisroel. And even after he retired, he still is constantly involved in so many important projects for the Frum community, such as Yeshivas Har Sameach, Temech, Keren HaShvius, even had a huge part in the planning and organizing of the massive MetLife Stadium Siyam Hashas, and so much more. So I am super excited to have him really learn and dive deep into many topics that involve Da'as Torah. So today's episode is going to be more of an introduction. We're going to get to know Rabbi Bloom, his life story. I am very, very excited. And another big thing is we launched our website, JFoundations.com. There you could get our podcast, both in video and audio. We have a few other podcasts as well, so go check it out. Now, let's get to the first episode of On the Shoulders of Giants with Rabbi Shmuel Bloom. I'm Yisrael Liedkowski. You are listening to the Foundations Podcast.
Nice to be here. I'm so proud of the work of my grandson, Yisroel.
Yeah, Hashem,
and whatever we can do, we help, and he should be able to have the schus to be able to help klal Yisroel for many years.
Amen. Be'ezras Hashem. So let's start. We have many episodes. We're going to dive deep into many different topics and areas in life that you had dealing with Gedolei Yisroel. But today's episode is going to be more introductions, just in general about your life. So let's go back, and back when you were a kid growing up in America, how was it?
Well, let me trace back to a story. I was standing outside Levaya Makayan, so I can't go to Levayas, but Reb Sidney Greenwald, Choshev Balabos, was nifter, and I was standing outside the Levaya, and the rebbes don't like to go into the matame in the ohel by Levaya, so the Klosenberger Rebbe was standing outside. And we were talking, and with a few other balabatim, and the Klosenberger Rebbe said that almost every family that you find came to America in the early years and remained Shemer Torah mitzvahs. It started with a bracha from a Rebbe.
Wow.
And it can always be traced. And he was telling the story with Reb Sidney Greenwald, which I don't remember, but there was such a story. And the Greenwald family, we had so many special people have done so much for klal Yisroel in the family. But I told them the story with my family. My father was a 19-year-old boy, young man in Hungary, and lived in a little village. Went to yeshiva in a little bit larger village. Spends his time. By the time he was 13, 14 years old, he was already working in the family farm. They had a timber. They lived in the village. There's no minyan on Shabbos. That if they needed a minyan, they had to bring people to be there.
The family, they were Shomer Torah mitzvahs.
The family was Shomer Torah mitzvahs. Mm-hmm. And my father said he wanted to go out to do something in the world. He'd like to go to America. 19-year-old boy, go to America. His father said, "Are you crazy? Straight for America."
Yeah, it's not like today. They have Lakewood and Borough Park and yeshivas and
right. There was still Shabbos. So on. You're going to go to America. What are you going to do? He was against it. My father wanted to go, so they made up. They'll go to Reb Shaya L'Kerastira. Reb Shaya L'Kerastira was a Baal Mephus. He was the leader of Hungarian Jewry for 30, 40 years. This was the year before he was nifta. Mm-hmm. And I actually went once a year to the yard site of Reb Shaya L'Kerastira, and I stood in the room that my father and his father probably went to ask Rabbi Shmuel Bloom what to do.
Wow.
And my father explained why he wanted to go, and his father explained to him why he didn't want him to go. And Rabbi Shmuel listened, and Rabbi Shmuel said, "As the bocher will gain, soll gain. Is wird sein gut. If the bocher wants to go, let him go. It will be good." Now, Rabbi Shmuel made many nisim. Many, what he was really malach, his whole books filled with stories of the nisim of Rabbi Shmuel Bloom. But I think this is one of the biggest mefes. A 19-year-old boy comes to America. There he comes. He went to his sister who was in Detroit. She had married an American soldier. That's why she went to it. And
he was Jewish.
He was Jewish, the soldier, and his name was Martin. And he went to my aunt in Detroit. Another sister had come along with her. My grandmother didn't want one sister to go alone to America, so she sent her sister together with her, because she went there, and she was living in Detroit. So she went to Detroit, and they welcomed, they greeted their brother. Fine, why do you go to study? He's a 19-year-old boy, you have to go to work. Right?
Yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah.
So she got him a job. Ford Motor Company. That was the big employer in Detroit at that time. It was making
it's
cars.
Like Tesla today, the big America.
Except at that time, Ford Motor Company worked on Shabbos. So they told my father, "You have to work on Shabbos." And he went to his sister and said, "Come work on Shabbos. It is America. In order to be able to live, you have to have parnosa. Some people say it's pikuach nefesh. Right? You have to have food on the table. So therefore, in America, you're allowed to work on Shabbos." My father wasn't satisfied with that. He couldn't accept that. So he ran away. He went to his sister who lived on the east side, and there he worked he worked his way up. He got little jobs. Ultimately, he had a grocery store. The depression, goes beyond that. The stories. But that's. But he started. His strength for Shmir Shabbos and for keeping Shabbos was so strong.
It's so amazing also that it came from his sister. It's not that he went and he didn't know what to do and he tried to find a job and he just couldn't find a job. So it's even his family, the close people to him that he was staying by, they were telling him to, there's nothing else you could do. It's pikuach nefesh. So, we probably could, but even that, just that, he was 19, a young guy. It's not,
and that, beautiful. And that the bracha from the characters, it's sein good. It will be good. We wrote on his matzeva that he was nifter at 96 years old with close to 100 yotzi chalotav, close to 100 people shem yiter mitzvahs. So it starts with the message from the Gedolei Yisroel and the bracha from the Gedolei Yisroel make a difference.
Wow. And when did he get married? It was after he came to America?
Yes, he came to America. Now, he arrived in January 1924. I believe, maybe a month apart, in January 1924, my mother arrived as a 13-year-old girl.
Wow.
And she arrived in a different boat, different time. Her father was a Rav. And he had come to America 2 years before. He set things up, and then he brought his family over to America. And she came in as a young girl, went to night school, went to work for the Kevelson Tie Company. And as a bookkeeper, she learned bookkeeping, and they're also a tremendous battle for Shmir Shabbos.
She came with her whole family.
She came with her whole family, and her father was a Rav. Her father was a big Talmud Chacham, a Mechaber Sforim. His father was a Botei Din. He had a radio program. He had a radio program where he was the dayan. People would come to him for
asking questions,
and so on, and din Torahs. He was able to do Torah.
Live on radio?
Live on the radio.
So maybe they could have used our studio.
That's right. Maybe it's in your genes also.
There you go.
Right? So we had that. But she went for the summer for 2 or 3 weeks to the Zionist camp. And she and her sister were the only 2 Shomer Shabbos in the camp.
Wow.
So you can imagine what it is. Everybody's going out and everybody's doing things. And you're there, and she's sitting in a room on Shabbos and keeping Shabbos.
There wasn't any camps from people back then? Or?
Not until the 1940s was there such a, I think Camp Yeshiva was the first, Camp Aguda. These are the first camps they started for children who came over from Europe, the ones who
from
first
the
started
Holocaust.
But this whole concept, which is so natural to us, that during the summer the children go away to camp and under a good atmosphere, which is sometimes even more important than what they have during the year. Sometimes they're not good in learning, but they're good in sports, they're good in other things. It builds up the children. This whole concept of a frum camp didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And there they went, and they worked. They worked when they were young. No child labor laws came later.
Well, like young, even as a
16,
children?
17, 18 years old, they worked. As a bookkeeper, father started a grocery store.
That's the Blooms that eventually turned until today. They have some candies and snacks and stuff.
If you have Blooms, the grocery store actually went bankrupt, and he paid off all his debts. But then he went to as a salesman, the Chase Noodle Company. From there, he went to these wholesale groceries, sold into grocery stores. He was a good salesman. People liked him. He went around from store to store, and ultimately he took bulk candy and packaged it into smaller packages and sold it as Bloom packing.
This is all kosher, I'm assuming.
He had some which had a share and some didn't have a share. It was a different world.
Well, weren't enough customers if you only sell kosher.
No, you looked at the ingredients.
It's like in Europe in a lot of places. I was in yeshiva in Switzerland for back in the day a couple of years ago, and there also is, you go online, there's an official website, and there's a list of all the kosher items you could buy in the store. But you walk into the store, there's no hechsherim on any of the things. There's also a kosher makolet that they only bring in kosher items, plus they sometimes bring in stuff from Eretz Yisrael. But I guess back in the day in America, it was also the same.
There definitely was no website. And no way to check, and you read the label. That's the way the people at that time. That was the level of kashrus they had. They read the label. If there was no gelatin in it, if there was no tray for things in it, they ate it. So that's then later he started having, as the community grew and as the kashrus information grew, he started getting hechsherim on his candies and put it on the label.
So let's move on to when you were born and growing up. Where you went to school and, how much, obviously it's so beautiful to hear, both of your parents, just the power and push they had to keep Shabbos and to become Shomer Torah mitzvahs, how much you felt it in the house and how much do you feel that it influenced you growing up?
Well, it certainly influenced, but there was a period of growth. They had no education. There was no Beis Yaakov, the girls. There was no, my father left the yeshiva when he was young. Really didn't have an education. What changed or what developed, besides their strong feeling for Torah and Yiddishkeit and for Shabbos, what began to change is when I was going into first grade. We lived in Crown Heights, and in Crown Heights there were no boys-only yeshivas. Crown Heights Yeshiva was a day school there, had boys and girls together.
It was Jewish studies.
Jewish. He was even from there. There was a lot of Chashuv people came from there. Right? They grew out of it, but that was the school. It was co-ed. It was the beginning of a field. Mainly Talmidim of Chaim Berlin, Rav Hutner, and so on guided that we should have. It was the beginning of the Torah Surah. And Torah Surah was first starting then to have a day school, to have a yeshiva ketana that was for boys only. Really yeshiva. So Rabbi Paperman Rabbi Aaron Paperman was the first principal, and there was a group of parents who decided they were going to build this yeshiva, and my parents felt that this is the place they wanted me to go. My older brothers had gone to places out of the neighborhood, and here we're going to have in the neighborhood, a few blocks from the house, they're going to have a yeshiva they can send to. I remember probably my first memory is I was crying because I didn't want to go to first grade. I was supposed to go to kindergarten, and Rabbi Papeman said I should go to first grade. I wanted to go do all that extra work. I wanted to play in kindergarten.
Yeah, you wanted to play. I don't want to work here.
Right? So, but I went to the first grade, and the school started to develop. After 2 years, Rabbi Papeman left, and Rabbi Meilach Silva became the principal. And it was a group of parents who were working to build a masjid. Mm-hmm. So they worked together with the Rabbonim, and they worked together with the people, the Rabbeim and the administration, and they got to understand what a Ben Torah was, and what Torah is, and what its Yiras Shamayim is, and they began to grow from that experience of working for Torah, my father would go on Utica Avenue in Crown Heights one night a week, and he would go and get $2 and $3 ads for the journal.
Wow.
Is in order to put together to help raise the money for the yeshiva. Ultimately, he became the president of the yeshiva, and they respected his abilities. The oil flows to the top, and as a very special person, he worked. But whatever he worked for the school, whatever he worked for the yeshiva Eastern Parkway, which later was changed to Yeshiva Ramayla Silva was Nifta Young. Whatever he worked, he got back in loads, because he learned so much from it, and he became a mentor. And he started learning, and ultimately, when he was able to retire, he learned in a kollel. He started a kollel for Balabatim in the 5 towns. He went to a kollel in Yerushalayim when he was able to come here. So he developed that, and that ruach that he developed, he gave over to the children.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Chafetz Chaim was his favorite sefer. He would always talk the Meisim from the Chafetz Chaim.
It's so beautiful. We have also on our website, we have on JFoundations, we have a daily Chafetz Chaim share as well, the podcast, and on YouTube, the videos.
Right, not so much the halachas of Lashon Hara, which is also important, but the stories. The feeling. Torah is the best discharis. Torah is the best merchandise. And he had the story in Yiddish, the stories of the Chafetz Chaim, and he would always tell us over those stories. He would be giving that over to us, and so that was a development which changed ultimately the neighborhood. And also, when there were decisions that have to be made, I was the president of the yeshiva, he would be miyashiv with Rav Hutner. Rabbi Yitzchak of Yeshiva Chaim Berlin was the guiding light for the Yeshiva Eastern Parkway. And most of the Talmidim, most of the Rabbeim, there were some from Mir Yeshiva, others, but mostly many from Chaim Berlin. And all of a sudden, you had to come to Rosh Yeshiva and present the case and see the power of Da'as Torah, to see how the Torah looks at different issues. I was by my bar mitzvah. Before my bar mitzvah, my father took me to Rav Hutner had during the summer, he was like a bungalow in Far Rockaway. And he took me to say my pilpul, brought some cake and schnapps to Rav Hutner, and they asked me to, they came to get a bracha from the Shiva. And when I was there, he surprised me a little bit, because my father davened in a place where they davened Nusach Sfarad. But he quietly to himself, the way the halacha is, himself, he davened Ashkenaz because his parents davened Ashkenaz. I didn't know that because I thought he was davening Sfarad.
No, because that's the shul he went to.
The shul he went to, and that's what he was doing. And even whatever he was doing out loud, he was doing the Sfarad. Mm-hmm. So I would say, Kaddish, he would say Yasser B'Kornei, right? So I assumed also that I was going to daven the Sfarad. I go there, my father tells Rav Hutner that he has a problem with his son. I said, well, what kind of problem do you have with your son? He says, my father davened Ashkenaz, my grandfather davened Ashkenaz, and my son wants to daven the Sfarad. So I was a little bit taken aback, but we looked at Rav Hutner. What was Rav Hutner say? So Rav Hutner said, in his great wisdom, he said, you're 13 years old. What do you know the difference? Ashkenaz, Sfarad, and so on. Your father davens Ashkenaz, daven Ashkenaz till you're 18 years old. When you're 18 years old, you'll understand the difference. You'll know what it is. At that point, he says, if you want to change the Sfarad, at that point you can change the Sfarad. But he's a very, very wise man. So of course, when I was 18, I was in yeshiva. I wasn't davening Sfarad anymore. So I continued to daven Ashkenaz.
You mentioned going to yeshiva when you were 18. How did that work? When did you go? Were the yeshivas you were before?
So I went to Yeshiva Eastern Parkway for the seventh grades. Interesting enough, also, I was always the first, the top grade. I was the first grade, so I was in the first second grade, I was first third grade. Mm-hmm. Some of the Rabbeim moved along with us. I had Rabbi Leitner, Rabbi Leitner, who later was and we used to go visit him.
I remember a couple of times we used to go visit him.
He was a Talmud Amir Yeshiva in Europe who came over with the Mir. He came over with the Mir. He's actually originally from Germany, and he was a very, very special rebbe. I had in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. If you want to do an aside, after a number of years, he retired. He got the German reparations, and he retired, went to Bnei Brak, and he became close to Rav Shach. Rav Shach made a speech, but it's the dangerous time. There was a big tumult with the Arabs fighting wars and so on. It's a Shas Hakana, and we have to do whatever we have to do. He spoke, and my Rebbe, Rabbi Leitner, who was retired then, went home. He took a map of the Middle East and he drew a red line around Eretz Yisrael. And then he did blue around Egypt, and he wrote how many soldiers Egypt has. Blue around Jordan, blue around Iraq, blue around Iran, blue around Lebanon, all the nations of the world in that area that wanted to destroy Eretz Yisrael. They want to push them into the sea. And how many soldiers each one has? Millions and millions of soldiers, all surrounding this little dot in the middle, which was Eretz Yisrael. And he took it to Rav Shach, and he said, "You say that now is a time of sakona? Look at the way we're living." He says, he says, all these groups,
a constant threat.
You see that? You see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? You see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because without that it couldn't exist. There's no way that we could exist with it. Rav Shach loved it, and he wanted a copy of it. At any rate, that was our Rebbe. So 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, we had the same Rebbe. In 6th and 7th grade, we had Rabbi Shlomo Prager.
Well, what happened after 6th grade that he
didn't
continue?
What happened was, no, because it was time to change. It was too much.
Too much of
the too many years.
I hear.
But what happened was, at one point, I think when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, all of a sudden they added 2 grades ahead of us.
Like each year they were adding.
Year they
started at first, and then they had first and second, and third, and then all of a sudden they jumped ahead.
Jumped ahead with the 4th and 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a little bit insulted. I'm not in the oldest class there anymore. But later on, I found out what the story was. There was a Mrs. Schiller who had a son, Binyamin, that she wanted to enroll in the yeshiva. And she came and she brought him to the yeshiva. And Rabbi Malach Silber, in discussing with her, found out that she had a boy 2 years older who was in public school. Mm-hmm. Right? And he said, "I'm not going to take Binyamin unless you also give me the older boy."
Wow.
And he didn't have a class for the older boy. So he had to make 2 new classes
just
in order to bring that other boy to school.
Wow.
The older boy's name is Nata. He says, "Reb Nata Shela, Rosh Yeshiva Zer Sameach, who has thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Balei Tshuva come because of him, or because." And he had the support from the Balabatim. The Balabatim said, "We can't afford it, we can't do it." And I said, "My father and others," they said, "No, if this is what you feel we have to do, we're going to do." And an impact that has on Klal.
Wow. You just see the power of one person.
Of one person, and the decision making. The Rebbe is compared to Kochavim. Atztike Rabbin Kochavim, it says. And Elam Malamdi Tinakas. These are the. So Rav Ruderman used to ask, in what sense do you compare the Malamdi Tinakas to stars? And he said, if you see a child, you think, if you see a star, it looks like a little twinkle in the air, in the sky. Mm-hmm. But really, it's a whole world. It could be bigger than the whole world. That's a child. Because you think he's just a little thing. It looks small. Malamdi Tinakas understand that this is Chachavim, they're like stars.
This is all the, if he grows up, depending on how he grows up, is after his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
That in addition to that, right?
Wow, it's great.
But even what an individual can do. An individual has the power to be able to do.
I heard once from my rebbe, Rabbi Shmuel Brazil, he was saying how, the mitzvah of, you have 613 mitzvahs that you need to mekayim the mitzvahs. Let's say you're a Kohen, I'm not a Kohen, so how could I be mekayim the mitzvahs of a Kohen? Some people live in Eretz Yisrael, some people don't live in Eretz Yisrael. There's different mitzvahs for these people. Some mitzvahs are only for men, some mitzvahs are only for women. So, how is it possible for one person to be mekayim all 613 mitzvahs? So it says that if you influence someone and support and help him to do it, so you have a chelak in it, So it's nechshav as if like you have the schus of doing that mitzvah. Only if you connect and support and influence other people to different mitzvahs, that's the only way for you to get to 613. And he added on also, that's why, they say that the gematria of tzitzis is 613. But it's not really. It's less, he said, because you add the knots. So he said, like, what shaykh it's knots? Like, so you have sometimes if you have a gematria that doesn't work, so you say with the klal, so you add 1, but like to add 5, because the knots, like, what are we even talking about here? Right. So he said that's not good, because the whole meaning of tzitzis, the only way you could get to 613 is if you're tied to other people. Nice. So that's why you could only get to the gematria of 613 with the knots on the tzitzis, because that's what it is. You only get to 613 mitzvahs with the connection to other people and influencing them.
Very, very beautiful. Like Rebbe David Crowley says, Moshe Rabbeinu is shokol keneged kol klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Chazal says, shokol klal Yisrael. Rav or Abaye says 1/3 of klal Yisrael, 1/4 of klal Yisrael. How do you measure that? How do you measure a person's worth, the part of klal Yisrael? And he explained with this basic yisod, how do we have Torah? How do we do mitzvahs? Because Moshe Rabbeinu taught us. So every mitzvah that we do goes also for the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. So he's shokol to all of klal Yisrael. If somebody sees to it that a city learns Torah or does mitzvahs, then he's shokol to then he's equal to that city. Right? So each person, that's how you tell the value is. How much influence does a person, how many people did he affect in his life and the things that he did? That's the value that the person has. And also the Chazal said the schar that you get for that is if you do a mitzvah and then you have charot, so chas v'shalom takes over. Or what you did with somebody else, what you talk with somebody else doesn't get lost. That's continued.
Beautiful.
So from there I went to Chaim Berlin. Learned Chaim Berlin for 4 years for high school. At the end of high school, I had the opportunity to get a New York State scholarship. But in order to do that, I had to take at least 12 credits a term in college, which was a fairly heavy program. The Bachram in Chaim Berlin, for the most part, learned 2 starim, and then at night went to Brooklyn College, those who were going to college. But they would take 3 credits, 6 credits. To take 12 credits is hard with share the rest of the day of learning. And so I decided that I was going to take a year's leave of absence, and I'm going to go to a yeshiva to learn. Looked at different yeshivas, decided that Gedolei Yisroel would be good for me. I actually told Rav Hutner, I asked him permission to be able to go, and I wanted to go to Gedolei Yisroel. He says, I think it's a good idea, you should take off the year, but I think there's a better yeshiva for you. Let me think about it. And then he didn't get back to me for a while, so finally I went into Camp Morris. He was out in Camp Morris, and I went to meet with him, and he said, why are you here? I said, well, I want to take off the year. I think Gedolei Yisroel is the best yeshiva for me. So he said, so why are you here? So I said, because the yeshiva told me that maybe there's a better place. He says, there are no yeshivas underground. If you checked all the yeshivas and you want to go, he says, and that's the way you go. He says, I went in Gedolei Yisroel for the year. I started in Rav Kalevsky's shir, and because I had a chavrusa who I also had a chavrusa last year or 2 years ago, Rabbi Pinchas Lipner was the principal in San Francisco. I think for 50 years. And he retired. He moved to Ramat Eshkol, and for a while I was still learning the chavrusa with him in Ar Sameach. I had the opportunity to go back, but he was older, and he was going up to Rabbi David Kronglass's shir on Chanukah time. So Chanukah I asked to go up together with him. They felt that I wasn't younger, I wasn't older, and I didn't have to go, and so on. So it was a little bit of a battle, but at the end, I was my best chavrusa, and they agreed that I should go to go up from Rav Kalevsky's shir to Rabbi David Kronglass's shir, the Mashgiach. Also on the side, the Mashgiach giving a shir. Rabbi David Kronglass was a mashpia on the German and American boys in the Mir. And one of those boys was Rabbi Naftali Neuberger, who was the brother-in-law of the Rosh Yeshiva and the executive director of Yeshivas Gedolei Yisroel. When he came back to the yeshiva, he convinced the yeshiva to bring Reb David as the Mashgiach. They saw the action and application that they tried to get him to come, be able to bring him to America in the late 1930s. but it was too close to the war. They weren't able to get out in time, and he ultimately went to Shanghai, and was there together with the Mir Yeshiva. He was one of the first people to come out of Shanghai to Japan, to America, because he had the invitation. He had a job waiting for him in Baltimore. So
it was easier for him to get.
So he came to Mashgiach. He comes to Baltimore. He meets the Rosh Yeshiva, and Rabbi Neuberger introduces him. This is the Reb David Kronglass, and he's going to be the Mashgiach. He accepts to be the Mashgiach. And Reb David Kronglass says to the Rosh Yeshiva, "Okay, which year I'm going to say?" So Rav Ruderman looked at him and said, "I'm hiring Mashgiach. I'm not a Rebbe to say a Shia." He says, "I know American Bachram. American Bachram won't have respect for a Mashgiach unless he's also a Talmud Chacham. If I'll be their Rebbe in learning, I'll be able to teach them, then they'll listen to me when I say my shmuzim also." And so he became a Rebbe.
Why don't you think that it's taka thing that the Mashgiach is also a Rebbe, usually that he's not?
Well, today, I think we've grown to the fact that we can understand that even if he's not a Rebbe, as long as we're not talking about an Amoritz, but he's a Talmud Chacham, but Reb Don Segel, the Mashgiach, told me that he wanted to be Rosh Yeshiva. And Rav Shach told him, he was pretty sure it was Rav Shach. Rav Shach told him, "We have plenty of Rosh Yeshiva. He said, well, we need a good Mashgiach." Right? He says, a Mashgiach to be Madrich something. And Reb Matasio Solomon, who's had tremendous influence on America, actually worked with Taram Surah. So it's very, very important that every school have a Mashgiach. Whereas even at lower grades, you need somebody in addition to the person who's teaching the Torah. Because a Rebbe can't, especially if classes are too large, a Rebbe can't get involved with every student and understand what's bothering them, what's in their kishkas, and how to elevate them. And for that you need a Mashgiach. And so the Taram Surah started a program for training Mashgiachim and helping pay for have Mashgiachim
because it's another person to have.
Right, another person, and whose concentration is how is this child growing? What are his problems? What is he thinking? He says that a Rebbe doesn't have time for it. He has to make sure that he knows
He's
the
to prepare what to teach,
and has to teach him and make sure that the child's learning the skills that he has to learn, be able to learn. So what's so important is the development of the child and that's maybe what the Rebbe should be doing primarily, but you can't do that in the fact. You can help out, but to have every children dropping out and so on, all that starts 11, 12, 13 years old. And at that point, having a Mashgiach in the yeshiva so Reb David Kron was a Mashgiach in Da'as Torah. He was a Rebbe. I went to a Shia, and I developed a very, very warm relationship with Reb David. Shia, Baruch Hashem, learned well with my Chavrusa, with Pinchas Lipner. And at the end of the year was up. It's time for me to go to Brooklyn College, go to Chaim Berlin, and to Brooklyn College at night. And my brother, Yisroel, Zechariah Lebracha, came with a few friends on a trip to go. They were going to go to Washington. They stayed in Baltimore. And then over Shabbos, I think it was, and they went to Washington. They were going back Sunday. They were going back to, it was in June. They were going back to New York. And I was going to hitch a ride. I'm going to get a ride back from Baltimore to New York with my brother. So I went, it was like a week or two earlier from the end of the Zman. I went to Reb David on Shabbos, I think it was, and asked him permission to leave a week earlier to go to New York. He says, "Why do you want to go a week earlier?" I said, "We'll have a ride, and we're supposed to have to register in college for Brooklyn College next year." So he said, "So if you're leaving, why are you asking permission? Go. Just leave. What are you asking for shus?" Right?
That's the Mashgiach side.
That's the Mashgiach. Mashgiach says, "Well, he says, they're fine. You're leaving. You're going to Brooklyn College. You go. You have to come ask me permission for that. Go." I wasn't happy with that response, and I discussed it with my brother, and my brother said, "Look, you were here for a year, and you developed a relationship. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe go back." And I went to Rabbi Weinberg, who was party to my decision originally to come for a year. He says, "Go back to Reb David and and explained to me. He came for a year, so I went to the basic
The original plan was to come for a year,
right?
Yeah.
So maybe I never discussed it with Reb David, so maybe he didn't understand. He thought I was going to stay in the yeshiva. I went after davening to Reb David in the basic medrash, and in the middle of the basic medrash, he starts yelling at me. You have no cover for your abdeim. You go, get out of here. Like, amazing. So I said to my brother, look, where you going? I have to go. So rather, Reb Nosson Leitner was there, and an older bacher at that time. I think he was married. And Reb Nosson Leitner says, I'm going to go I'm going to go next week. I'll give you the ride. Stay the extra week. In the meantime, we discussed, and there Yisroel had an arrangements with Loyola College. You can go to college. You get credits for the yeshiva, which at that time you didn't have a Chaim Berlin. So maybe it's kedai to stay, to give up the scholarship and to go. Mm-hmm. So after Shir, I didn't go to Shir that morning, but after Shir, I went over to Reb David, and Reb David saw me standing by the doorway of the Shir room, and he said, are you coming again to explain to me why you're leaving? Or are you coming to be Shayleitza? So I said, I now have, see that maybe there's a possibility, maybe I should stay. He said, oh, that's a different story. Come over, if his arm around me, opened up a tricky ovis, if for all the money in the world, I won't leave him up in Torah, even sitting and learning here, you're steiging and so on, now you're going to go. At any rate, I went for 1 year, I stayed in the Yisrael for 12.
Wow.
Later on, years later, I found out that my brother Yisroel, Zachal Atayv, went secretly to Reb David and told Reb David, don't let me go back. Then I go back, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go to mathematician, what I wanted to do. The mices here, I was becoming a Ben Torah, and so on, I was growing and learning, and he encouraged me to. So Reb David didn't start yelling. It was with a cheshbon. It was a cheshbon. He felt that was the way to convince me and to work with me, and I had my double dealing brother
came behind your back,
coming, give me advice. Well, maybe you shouldn't leave, and so on.
And then behind your back, he's going and
he was the one that's So Baruch Hashem. So you see again the influence. The small story, a little incident that somebody can have, and somebody else makes a world of a difference.
When did you find out that your brother,
many years, I don't remember. Many years later.
No, like, well, what was your reaction?
By then, it was appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? By then, it was appreciation that certainly that was a major difference in my career path in terms of what I was going to be doing in life. And Baruch Hashem, you mentioned, was zeicha to be involved with Gedolei Yisroel and to be able to have influence on so many things going on in the world. When I retired from the convention, I said over from Ramat Yisrael Solomon, when mispalled during the Aser Simei Tshuva, Avinu Malkeinu, Kosveinu b'Sefer Zechuyos. Write us in the Sefer Zechuyos. And Ramat Yisrael asked, if you did the things that you were supposed to do, then you're in the Sefer Zechuyos. And if you didn't do it,
then you're not.
Then you're asking the Ben Shalom to write a lie? Put me in the Sefer Zechuyos, even though I don't belong.
It's like you either are or you're not.
Either you are or not. So what's tefillah? Avinu Malkeinu, because we write us in the Sefer Zechuyos, in the Sefer Zechuyos. And he brilliantly said, is what we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to write us in the Sefer to have the opportunity to have Zechuyos. Give us an opportunity. Give us the money we can give to a poor, and have a poor person come to us so we can give. He says, have the person who needs a chesed to come. Give me the opportunity to learn with somebody. Give me the opportunity to do these things. That's the tefillah that we have from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu from us. So Baruch Hashem, the Rebbe Hashem answered my tefillah. I had the opportunity from that decision of staying in the Yisroel and going there, and many other steps as we went along in life, is that he gave me the opportunity to do good things and to be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim and to listen to Gedolei Yisroel and follow Gedolei Yisroel and teach what Gedolei Yisroel have, and that so very, very appreciative of that.
So, like we mentioned, you're there. You stayed for as a talmid, then you became a rebbe, and you were an avrich there after, getting married for 12 years in Baltimore. And after that, you moved to be the executive director in St. Louis. So, kind of what was the story there? How did that happen?
So they were married. Actually, my wife had been brought up in a modern Orthodox family, and one year she said, let me go live full time. She had some neighbors who were very, very special people, the Schweids, Satmar Hasidim, and she became very close to the family, and she saw what Yir Shemayim was and what full Torah life was. So it was an influence on her, and she said, let me take a summer and let me go to a camp where I can be full-time in that type of an atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And so it's just Campanos.
Just kind of to get the experience.
Get the experience of living together with this people, in this community. So she went for an interview to Rabbi Baruch Borchad, who was the executive director of the camp, and then he was the executive director of Gedolei Yisroel at the time, who knew me well from my years working in Pirchei and Gedolei Yisroel, and he interviewed her, and right after the interview he says, that's good for Shmuel Bloom. And he read the Shidduch, and Shidduch didn't go easy, flat, but went back and forth, but ultimately very, very, also one of the major decisions, one of the most positive decisions, one of the most influential decisions in the type of life that I live in, the type of family we brought up, is when I married my wife. We were married in New York. I was a rebbe at that time in Baltimore when I first got married. Then I went to klal, learned with Rabbi Chaim Eisenberg, the Adam of Rabbi Martha Gifta, for a year in klal. And my wife, Baruch Hashem, became pregnant, and she was teaching in public school at the time. And she didn't, without realizing it, she had German measles because there were no symptoms. It was asymptomatic. They suspected it because they suspected that that was the last epidemic of German measles before the rubella vaccine. The German measles it wasn't a serious machal like corona, but it affected pregnant women, and pregnant women affects the babies, and the babies suffered all types of effects. Without realizing it, we had my wife's baby, our oldest daughter, Elisheva, as my wife had German measles, and my daughter was born with a serious hearing impairment. She was almost basically deaf. She was a bright girl, so she fooled everybody, and we even had places where amateurs would test them, would test it to see if they put something behind her back and so on, and she was able to catch everything. So they weren't able to confirm, maybe nervous parents would think this. But when she was about 12 or 13 months old, we were in Baltimore, we took her to Johns Hopkins University.
Like till then she couldn't talk, so it was harder to know if she could hear or not.
Right, she wasn't talking well. There were signs, but not serious, and we didn't know what it was. So they did an audiological test, and the chief audiologist, the chairman of the audiology department, Dr. Vincent Hardy, sat us down, young parents, and said, I have to let you know that your daughter has a very serious hearing impairment. There was a shock, obviously, to young parents.
Especially this was the first child.
The first child. He actually taught us something which is a benefit we have a life, for life, in explaining the education of the deaf. He explained that we don't really hear with our ears. The ear is a klal to catch sound waves. The sound then goes to the brain. Those waves, those electric waves then go to the brain. And the brain decides what to hear. So we hear with our brain, not with our ears. The problem was in this case that the transmission from the ear to the brain was affected. And because of that, they weren't getting to the brain. Now, one marshal is, when a baby cries, right, the mother hears it right away. The father sleeps through it. Is it the mother's hearing is better than the father's. No, the brain says, I want to hear when the baby cries. And the father says, I want to sleep.
I want to sleep.
So turn it off. Right? So he turns it off. So he doesn't. He says, so the brain, and from there but the mice is, I say it goes much more beyond that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu talks to us all the time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us messages. But you have to hear it. You have to hear it with the brain, not with the ears. You have to see the things that are going on. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to us all the time. He's continuous giving us message. But if you don't listen to it, if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't use the brain, you don't hear.
It's so true. Like you see, and everything around, especially now, past year with the corona, the war, all the tragedies, it's like, it's not just random stuff happening. It's Hashem talking to us. We need to sit and,
it's very clear.
What is Hashem telling us? Yeah.
And I heard recently, it's Rabbi Meir Bronstein, the Rebbe of the Da'as Torah in Long Island, told me that set up for Rashach, B'Shem Rashach.
Mm-hmm.
The Gemara talks by Churban Abayis. We're recording right before Tisha B'Av. The Churban Abayis, the Gemara goes through. Nobody understood why. They asked the Chachamim, they asked the Nevi'im, they asked everybody. Nobody understood why the Churban. Until it came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shalom Baruch Hu, B'Torah Tchila, whatever that means. He says the other. Rashach is, if we don't know why, what benefit is it? If we know there's something happening because of X, so we know we can correct X, and we take away the problem. But if we have Yisurim, if you have a corona, you have buildings falling, and everything's happening, and you have the Churban Abayis, and the Chachamim, and the V'im, and nobody knows why. So how can you become better? How can you learn from it? And if you don't learn from it, it's wasted. Oh, Corona, people said, I want to come out with it. We should go back to like before Corona. Chas v'sholom. It's Chas v'sholom should be like before Corona. Then it was all wasted. What have we learned from it? How are we different? So Shach answered, there are two who know why. HaKadosh Baruch Hu and each one of us. Each one of us can make a cheshbon. We know the reason. We know how it affects us. We know how to listen.
Deep down,
each one of us, because we're the only ones who really know each other, ourselves. And we know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us. We know we have to listen.
No, it's so true that, if it's just, it happened, okay, let's move on. But no, obviously it happens, everything happens for a reason. So, what is Hashem trying to tell us to change? And so it shouldn't happen again, chas v'shalom.
Right.
And what do you think? Obviously, it's also the big stuff, but also every small thing in life is all different signs from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What could one do to notice better these signs? And another question would be is how to make sure that you're understanding the sign in the right way, that you're kind of changing the right thing and understanding the message correctly.
So, hearing. You have to use your brain. You have to think. Are you thinking the right way? Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, I heard a shmuz from him, Parshas Bolok. I was in Bnei Brak. I went to listen to the shmuz. And he says, it's Mavel Arayan. It's shocking. Bilam, if you listen to Bilam, you see Bilam is a tzaddik. Bilam says, I don't do anything without the Rebbe Shalom. I can't say a word to the Rebbe. I told you I can't do anything with it. You look 10 times, 15 times in the parasha, he keeps on saying all the things the Rebbe Shalom. He's a tzaddik. Comes to Elam Abba. Right, they say, Bilam Arosha.
What happened? You listen to the Torah, you listen to this, I did everything the right way.
I only did what the Rebbe Shalom told me to do. I didn't do anything. I can't do anything that the Rebbe Shalom said. I did everything called the Rebbe Shalom. So he says, a person goes through life thinking he's a tzaddik. I think he's doing everything right. And then he comes to El Mabo, he's going to see it's not that way. How do you prevent that from happening? And the answer, he says, because negias, what you think can change your mind, make you rationalize. You can convince yourself anything. You have to have somebody else to talk to. You have to have somebody who loves you, someone who wants your good, somebody who's a ben Torah or a Rav, a rebbe, somebody who you can relate to and say, this happened to me. I think this is the reason, and I want to make this change. Is this the right thing to do? Mm-hmm. When you have an outside party who doesn't have the negias,
doesn't have the, less of the emotion, more just like the fact, what happened, what to do.
And obviously it has to be somebody who wants your good.
Yeah.
Right? You have somebody who wants
you need to develop that relationship and connection with someone
who wants your good, and then you can, I think that's the answer, to know, I think first, try to figure it out yourself. You know it better than anybody else. Make a plan. What can I do better? And discuss it with somebody. So this young couple, right, who now had this challenge of a child who had to have a lot of training in order to be able to learn how to speak. And it was an Alexander Graham Bell Society. We used to get, every month, they used to give us the directions of doing. Baruch Hashem, my wife especially, we put in a lot of time to train. And in deaf education, there's a big machlokas. Some say the best thing is to use sign language, because that's easier for them. Mm-hmm. And others say that no, you want to be able to get to a hearing society and teach them how to lip read and how to use the little hearing that they have, the residual hearing with hearing aids. Mm-hmm. And
they were able yet to hear a little bit?
Yeah, almost everybody can hear a little bit in different frequencies. Mm-hmm. And so on. So if you put a hearing aid, you can be able to get some sounds which the brain can interpret in terms of what the person means. And it was before cochlear implants, which is a whole other story. But we had that. So we spent a lot of time in training ourselves, how to train Elisheva, our daughter. Baruch Hashem, today she's a grandmother with our kid, and all hearing, because it wasn't hereditary. It was because of the German measles. When she was 4 years old, we needed a hearing educating society. And in Baltimore, there wasn't. Most of them were signing. They were using sign language. Mm-hmm. So we had to look for another place to go. There was one school in Northampton, Massachusetts. There was no Jewish community there. There was another Central Institute for the Deaf, which was one of the best schools in the country, in St. Louis, Missouri. So we called them up. We'd like to come for an interview. And they started laughing. Interview. This was there was just an epidemic of, you know how many children were born deaf? We have a waiting list.
That was one of the big things that it affected.
Many children were affected with hearing losses. Okay, so we started looking for other opportunities, other possibilities, and we got a call from Kenneth Spetner in Shalom in St. Louis, and he said, we have a yeshiva here, we're looking for an executive director. You're the associate executive director of Rabbi Neuberger, and Gedolei Yisroel, and we'd like you to come and take a job here, or at least interview for a job. So I said, there's no way that we want to leave Gedolei Yisroel or the job or take a job in executive director yeshiva in St. Louis. But I have a daughter. We'd like to go to Central Institute for the Deaf. They won't even look at us. Mm. You arrange for an appointment with them, and I'll come down and take a look at the yeshiva. Dr. Lester Zephyrin, who was a member of the board of the yeshiva, was also friendly with some of the people on the board of Central Institute for the Deaf. And sure enough, we got an appointment, and she got accepted to Central Institute for the Deaf, and I accepted the job as executive director of St. Louis Rabbinical College in St. Louis. 5.5 years later, to make story short, a lot of happened in between, but 5.5 years later, she was able to go to a regular school already, and I told them that he was able to go to a regular school. She was going to go in Far Rockaway to TAG, and I said that I gave notice in December that the Mitzvah Hashem in June I would be leaving. We should find another executive director. And within a week, I got a call from Mendy Shayowitz that the Aguda was opening a program called Project Hope, a government-funded program for employment, and they would like me to be the director of vocational education. Mm-hmm. Like me to come to New York. So I said, did anybody tell you that I was leaving St. Louis? They said, no. But they needed me in January. So I discussed it with the yeshiva there, we worked it out, and January 20th of 1975, I became the director of vocational education at Gedolei Yisroel, and the rest we'll have to leave for another time.
Mm-hmm. So just we're mamash out of time. We definitely will be back for more episodes to talk about different stuff. To just maybe finish off, one last question. What do you think is the secret to accomplishing so much?
The secret is very simple. The secret is we don't accomplish. It's all siyata d'shmaya. Whatever we do is, if we have siyata d'shmaya, it works. If we don't, we don't. I give a class in Ur Sameach and Ur Lagola and fundraising, and I tell the story. I went to Toronto to raise money together with Rabbi Rubenstein, who's today the mayor of Bnei Brak. We went to Toronto to collect money for Karen Hashvias, and we got a bracha from Chaim Kanevsky, and we went there, and it was unbelievable. Everybody we called was in, gave us appointments. We asked them for money. They gave us money. They gave us more than we asked them. Sometimes it was magnificent. We Baruch Hashem. And Rabbi Rubenstein, Talmud Muvik of Rav Chaim Kanevsky, said, "You see the bracha from Rav Chaim Kanevsky. We have the bracha. You see, it works." And we were very much liach. So I said yes, but in my heart of hearts, I had a machshava zora. I said, "Yeah, it's the bracha of Rav Chaim Kanevsky is very nice, but we did a good job. We had a nice presentation.
We were mashkia. We worked hard, and Baruch Hashem worked out."
From there, I went to Los Angeles. I couldn't get an appointment. Nothing. Nobody answered my phone calls. Nobody. The people I went to for Shabbos because they're going to give me a big contribution. I asked them for whatever what he called. He gave me $1,800 instead of studying $18,000. He gave me $1,800. It turned all the way around. So if I didn't realize it before, I realize now, and I tell them in fundraising especially, but it's in everything in life. It's all siyata d'shmaya. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. HaKadosh Baruch Hu accomplishes. We have to be mishtadel. We have to do our piece, and if we do our piece, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help us, and we have hatzlocha, and we'll siyata d'shmaya, and we'll Hashem. It'll be accomplished.
What a great episode. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you learned something new. Hope you were able to put something in your pocket for life. We had so many incredible stories, so many important life lessons, and this was just the beginning. Next week, we are going to be back. We're going to have many more episodes with Rabbi Bloom about many different topics and different stuff that he was involved throughout the years. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on iTunes and Spotify or wherever it is, make sure you follow, subscribe. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you share it with friends, family, that they could enjoy the beautiful stories from Rabbi Bloom as well. Also, if you have any questions, you could send an email to info@JFoundations.com or send a WhatsApp to +972 55 711 6220. Thank you for watching. We will be back next week.